forgetting the introduction that I had prepared, and I'm putting my own work as the introduction. I'm if I put it very immodestly, I'm a very happy and successful enterprising woman. I have been able, with the help of my parents and God and family, teachers, friends, students, I have been able to chart out for myself a very exciting career, with which I have been able to help other women as well as other men. I today call myself a social entrepreneur, who has been trying to solve certain problems in the society in relation to English literature education, etc. We have a coaching center, which I don't want to talk about, which goes very well. We have a publishing house where you can publish your books if you want. You can work as editors or proofreaders, or you can also be our customers, and of course well-wishers. We have a literature merchandise shop where also a lot of people work, my previous students and friends and colleagues, where we produce materials, lifestyle products which are helpful to understand and appreciate literature better. We also conduct training programs and workshops. One is coming up on the 2nd and 3rd of November. I invite all of you to it. It is called Doing English. It is a workshop on diverse careers or career options for students of English literature. If you come, we can talk about academic careers, corporate training, film production, and what you can do in relation to film production, and entrepreneurship, web-based careers, etc. As a woman entrepreneur, it has been a very difficult journey and challenging journey. I have, at every juncture in my development, I have been made aware of my strengths as a woman as well as my weakness as a woman. And I have learned from my development as a woman entrepreneur and a teacher that it is most important to be a human being first, and then a woman and other roles that you have to take up in your life. To such an extent that I don't even like being called a woman. You are a woman, aren't you a woman? I feel like an insult. I would rather be a human being, which is possible for me to think because we are at the third or post phase of what we call feminism. Feminism is the awareness of women's roles in society. Feminism is the understanding that women have been marginalized and exploited in society. Feminism is the understanding that patriarchy has subjugated women, weakened women, which was very much so in the past, which is continuing to be so in various sections of the society. There are a lot of women, majority of women probably, in the world who are still not empowered, who cannot stand up for themselves, who do not find their voice. We have increasing issues of domestic violence and rape and sexual abuse, gender abuse, and so on and so forth in our society. It is only increasing, very sadly. But it is also true that academically, feminism and gender studies as a discipline has grown a lot. It is also true that, at least in pockets, some women have been really, really empowered. We have women in all walks of life, from the very highest leaders of nations and leaders of multinational corporations, thinkers, internationally acclaimed writers, sportswomen. In every walk of life we have other professionals, we have women, which is a very, very welcome change. It is up to us, educated women and empowered women, to talk about feminisms, to talk about the need for equality and freedom and consideration at least, and empower the women who are with us. So I take this opportunity given to me as very important. I look upon it with a lot of responsibility because this is one of the opportunities that I have got as a woman to talk about my identity, gender identity, as well as yours. Yeah, the first one, orange. This yeah. I downloaded one bottle. It happened to be pink. Then I thought, okay, good, let it be pink. And I wrote on it, gender is fluid, and made it my first slide. This is a very great moment in history, this 2019-2018 period. Even when there are increasing number of violence instances against women, this is also the time when there has been amendment of the Article 377 in our Constitution, which has from the British Raj times itself criminalized homosexuality. On the day in which this amendment happened and decriminalization of homosexuality happened, I was teaching in an institute. And that day, or the next day probably, I gave the students a group discussion topic about it. And we invited the head of the institute, who is a very well-known and highly placed person, to come and listen to the discussions. He was a man, part of the patriarchal society that criminalized homosexuality until then. And at the end of all, my students really did well. They spoke very knowledgeably and confidently, and they gave me a lot of new ideas. At the end of the discussions, this person said, I don't know why you have to talk about this so much. This is not an important issue at all. Everybody was silent. We still think it is important. And he said, this is just a matter of legal change. It is just amendment. And he spoke so much against homosexuality and alternate sexualities from a very conservative point of view. And then he said, and then I said, sir, as men and women also, who are heterosexual also, it is our concern to talk about homosexuality. I tried to explain a little bit. He didn't understand, because it will take time to understand. I understand now. It is not easy for the patriarchal, heterosexual society to understand these things and accept these things easily. And then after he left, I talked to my students. I said, as normal people, heteronormal people, which is what we consider ourselves, for us also, it is very important to talk about the breaking open of boundaries of gender. Because none of us can be completely within one of the binaries. None of us is purely man or purely woman. All of us will have hundreds and thousands of examples to cite for this. There are so many men who are motherly and caring, and they love cooking, and they do not conform to the masculinity norms completely. I have my own, I don't mind saying this at all. With the permission of my in-laws, when I got married and went to my husband's house, they are all very liberal people. Which is why I am also able to live a liberal and free life. Very liberal people. In the first few days after my marriage, I heard a commotion in the drawing room or in the balcony, and I went to see what it is. I saw my father-in-law standing on a table and my mother-in-law killing a snake. It was beautiful. He was scared. He is scared of snakes. He climbs on a table and sits there. Which doesn't make him any less a man. Which doesn't make my mother-in-law any less a woman either. They are beautiful. It is beautiful that he is afraid of snakes, I thought. I love him all the more because of it. Gender is fluid means we cannot divide ourselves, our society, into man and woman, two watertight compartments. One does not come in the other. If a man behaves a little, even though we liberally speak in the bottom of our hearts, in our subconscious mind, this binary is there. That is why when I said my father-in-law is on a table and my mother-in-law is killing a snake, I would also laugh. I also laughed that day, I think. We laugh because this is unexpected. We don't expect. But most men must be afraid of snakes. You know. So gender is fluid means there is a lot of masculinity in me being a woman, which is good, which is wonderful. And there is lots of femininity in the men sitting there, which is also wonderful. We should learn to appreciate it, enjoy it. But we have all grown up saying, hearing, aren't you a boy? Why are you crying? Aren't you a girl? Sit properly. Why are you speaking? I used to keep telling my mother in my adulthood as an entrepreneur, my mother always used to say, you should speak slowly, you should not, your voice, the roof should not hear. I always told her, if I had been an obedient, feminine girl, now how will I teach when the current goes off, the power goes off, and I have to just speak like that. It doesn't mean anything. It's just oppression, this gender, this sexuality, and the watertight compartments into which it is put. Gender is fluid, we are able to say today, after the abrogation of 377 and a lot of other wonderful things that have also happened. So let us go. I don't have a lot of time to talk in general like this. You are also here to learn about the theory and the facts and the authors and works and all that. So there is a lot. I don't know how to talk about feminism, let alone in 1 or 2 hours, in a few days even. But let me just go on to talk about the basic facts. As I just told you, feminism is based on the belief that historically women have been subjugated. The aims of feminism is not to eliminate men at all, but to eliminate patriarchy, which is a system where men and women are both victims. I keep thinking that men are even more victims of patriarchy than women are. If women cry or express themselves or complain, it is okay, she's a woman. But a man can't cry, a man can't complain. He has to put up his masculine facade all the time. He has to be successful, he has to look good, he has to be powerful. He can't climb on a table if a snake enters the room. It is terrible. Men actually need more opportunities to speak out and talk about, confront their gender problems. A couple of years ago, when some terrible things happened in our society, little girls were raped and so many things happened, you know that. My students in that batch and test told me, let us do something to create awareness for women, etc. And all this developed into a short-lived movement of that time called Equal. We called it EQUALL. Some of the people who are actively in Equal are here in this room also. And at that time, we talked about, we went to colleges and conducted competitions and gave students the opportunity to talk about problems and their experiences, etc. When I went to some of the traditional, all the colleges in fact in Trivandrum, co-educational colleges, I was shocked because the girls were all excited and they came up easily and they talked about their problems and experiences easily, while men, the boys, sat very sheepishly and they didn't know what to say. We encouraged them to speak, and I remember one occasion, most of them said, I don't have anything to say. Gender is not my, I don't have anything to say. And on one occasion we pressed them a little, said, talk about it, talk about your experiences. Have you felt oppressed in terms of gender? And one boy even became very emotional. I am sure he had a lot of things to say, a lot of pent-up frustrations and traumas are there, I'm sure. But he was not able to tell us, obviously, because we were strangers. I wonder if he tells anybody. There are very bruised and injured people out there, I'm sure. We have to learn. It is, when you talk about feminism, the first and foremost thing that I have to say, is as women, we should turn to the men in our families, in our lives, and help them also to come to terms with their gender, especially the sons that you bring up. It is very important to help them to talk about their gender and confront their gender issues and treat women equally. Most of the time, they don't do it because of frustrations and problems that they can't express. So today, it is useless and even criminal to talk about just feminism. We have to talk about masculinities, we have to talk about gender issues in general, sexualities, alternate sexualities. Without incorporating all these into the discussion, we cannot talk about gender. But feminism, however, began with the intention of liberating women, giving them more freedom, to reconstruct culture to be inclusive of women's experiences also. Women should also be able to talk about their experiences. That is how feminism began. A very early realization about feminism was that it is a Western phenomenon. That is because feminism as a movement began in USA and UK in the 1960s. Before that also feminism was there in other ways. I will talk about that later. And as a movement, it started in a very radical manner. They were against men and they asserted their femininity and women's rights very violently. And a lot of people turned against feminism from then onwards. Today's men who do not know anything about the genesis of feminism or how it developed or what happened in the 1960s, etc., continue to use the word feminist as a bad word, as a swear word on women. In social media, etc., if women speak up a little bit, you see a lot of men coming and throwing mud on her. And the one word that we Malayalis are very familiar with now is the word feminichi. It rhymes with another bad word, as you know. That is why feminichi. And it is sad because feminism is actually a wonderful thing. It doesn't say men are all bad or men are all wrong or we should attack them or anything. That is not what it says. But it has become a swear word because women, it continues to be so. Women should not recognize their talents and skills and freedom. They should not consider themselves equal to men. That ultimately is there in the psyche of our society. So, why is it a Western phenomenon? Why is it attacked as a Western phenomenon? A lot of people say in India women are respected. We call India herself as a woman. We have goddesses. We worship women. We don't need feminism in India. That is what some people think. But that is also not acceptable. Because to worship women as goddesses itself is a kind of marginalizing women. When men try to worship you, you should say, please don't worship me, I'm an ordinary human being. Treat me as a human being and an ordinary woman. When men try to abuse you or attack you also, you should say, you have no right to attack me. Whether you are my father or husband or whoever. I'm an individual, I'm an independent human being. I have my rights and freedom. So that is the level a woman should stand in. She should not be worshipped also. In post-colonialism also, some exotic, Westerners will exoticize Oriental cultures. That is also bad. That is also not a way of respect. So in India, the nature of women's oppression is different from the West probably. We don't need the same kind of feminism, but we do need feminism of many kinds of feminism we need. The tribal women have their own feminism. They need their own liberation, I mean. The middle class women need their own. The upper class women need their own. The rural women need their own. The working class women need their own, and so on and so forth. You cannot compartmentalize all women into one category. They are not just one person or identified by one experience, which is why we talk about the term feminisms. I am talking from a very basic perspective because this is a very mixed group and my nature, my habit is to focus on, in case somebody needs to know the basics, they should know. So that is why I know a lot of people will find whatever I'm saying superfluous. These are all very well-known things and nothing new about it. But so I was saying, we also need feminism. Every woman needs feminism, but of a different kind. It is not the same kind. To homogenize women, to talk about them in one umbrella term, is itself a marginalization. It's negating our voices. It's denying us our individualities and individual experiences. So that is also one kind of oppression. To say that there is only one feminism, or to say that some people don't need feminism. Historically, how has patriarchy perceived women? I will speak your minds. It would be wonderful if you interact. If somebody wants to say something, you're welcome. Otherwise, I'll say what is in your mind. How has patriarchy perceived women? I mean, women as mother, women as seductress, woman as housekeeper, woman as cook, then woman as teacher. Today, as I was driving here, my friend who was driving me here, I was saying, let us go fast, oh my God, I need to look at my presentation, I'm not prepared. And he said, why do you have to prepare feminism? It is in your blood. I said, and then we talked about women, and then he was telling me, probably if you were a man, you wouldn't be so successful as a teacher. As a woman, whatever you are doing is, selling better. If a man doesn't have all this freedom to play around and do whatever he wants and be so eccentric and different and all that. I was thinking it's also probably because woman, naturally teacher is woman, in our minds. Of course, men are also wonderful teachers. All the teachers sitting here are wonderful teachers, I know personally. From my memory, from my career also, I can name so many wonderful men. But when you say teacher, it is obviously a woman. Right? When you say doctor, it is a man. That is why we have a doctor and a lady doctor. We don't have a doctor and a male doctor, right? Doctor and lady doctor, because lady doctor is the aberration. We have teacher and male teacher, I suppose. So, historically, women have been perceived as domestic, as private. Always women in the company of children, women in the company of other women. Think of family photos from the past, from your ancestors' times, or think of wedding photos, etc. You will never see a wedding photo where a woman is wearing Western clothes and liberated look. She is not wearing makeup and she is standing like this. It will always be feminine makeup and looking very beautiful and very feminine gestures and looks. Women hold their hand in front of their body like this. They tilt their head a little. These days they pout also a little. When we go to the studio, this irritating photographer will tell us, tilt your head, tilt your head, tilt your head until your head is looking like this. Until you get that stupid look, I should say. Whereas if a man stands like this and takes a photo, why are you laughing? Because of the gender binary in your mind. Why can't a man stand like this and take a photo? A man has to lift his head and, So, these are some of the ways. I will show you some pictures from the Victorian period. Look at the way the head is tilted. Look at the cat on the lap. There is a cat on the lap. Always in the company of other women, and if you want some metaphors, there is a cage also she is holding to embody the caged identity of women, I suppose. Women in the company of children, women washing clothes, women in the kitchen. If you want, you can also metaphorically see a cow there. Woman as used and woman as commodity and woman as probably meat. Because that picture originally shows what part of the cow's cattle's body is what meat? This part is called this meat, that part is called that meat, like that. That is the picture actually, that one. So this is a Victorian kitchen. And then the woman writer. Except for probably John Keats, no male writer will sit like this. Woman writer, imaginative, romantic, lost in her dreams, probably thinking of some lover. This is the subliminal message these pictures give. And one more picture. In the Victorian period, women were supposed to have the inverted umbrella shape. Every culture has some covetable body shapes. What shape your body should be in? Inverted umbrella shape is Victorian. They wore tight corsets and big hooped skirts, on top of which they wore 6 to 12 skirts. Don't laugh, because these days we also do that. Very thin people wear too many underskirts when you wear sari. We wear the, what is it called, in shape, which is a modern corset. If you look up some of the clothing apps, you will see 100 different kinds of clothing, inner clothing that will give you proper shape. Do not wear it. Because it will, prevent your blood from circulating properly. It might give you diseases also. Whatever they say, I would say do not wear it. Why do you need to have the hourglass shape at all? This clothing that the Victorian women wore was not only for good looks, it was also to prevent them from running away with their boyfriends, or to prevent them from going to schools and sitting down properly in the chairs. You can't sit with this funny Kathakali costume. It is a means of preventing women's mobility also. I read a book called Victorian Corset. In that book it is said there was something called pregnancy corset. Pregnant women's belly was considered obscene. They had to tightly wind up their body, pregnant belly, push it down, so that nobody will know she's pregnant. This is why, this is how in novels like Tom Jones, sister is delivering and leaving child on the bed. Nobody knows that she is pregnant. Because they are wearing pregnancy corset, and many women died of it. Children were born deformed because of it. Many women died of burns because when they walked about with their crinolines and hooves, it caught fire. And they were not allowed to go to doctors. Do you see why Western women needed feminism? They were not allowed to go to doctors because they were treated through perforated sheet or whatever. Doctors cannot look at their bodies. This is how homeopathy came for treating women. So that because they can't be treated by other doctors. So terrible it was, really. And there was, in the Victorian period, the Victorian dress reform movement and rational dress movement, where these poor women who were wearing crinolines and hoops, they wanted to wear comfortable clothing. They wanted to wear loose blouse and trousers and ride bicycles. They were treated like witches. They were treated like very bad women. They were taught a lesson for wanting to wear proper clothes. So they needed feminism. It is obvious. And with the colonial project also, men went to a new world, and you know what Hester Prynne went through in Scarlet Letter. Husband left her and she was left alone. She had nobody to look after her. She fell in love with the man, and she is the witch. The man has no problem. Today also it continues to be like that. Anna Karenina committed suicide because she is a woman. So in those days, in case any woman didn't understand properly what are the correct ways of being a woman, like in Vanity Fair, there were institutes that taught women how to be good women. In Vanity Fair, Amelia Sedley and Becky Sharp go to one, what was the name of the institute they went to? I remember all the time. Today I don't remember.
Pinkerton.
Miss Pinkerton's Academy for Young Ladies. Miss Pinkerton, you know how she will be teaching. And in case you need some material to study, you can buy these handbooks for how to be good women. The women of England, their social duties and domestic habits. If you don't know your social duties and domestic habits, please learn. So, handbooks were there for acculturating women, for teaching women how to belong to their gender, how to belong to their role as women. In today's society also, as long as women conform to their feminine roles, they are considered good and beautiful and chaste and wonderful. When they step outside their roles, they are shrews and witches and feminities and all those words. So this is how women were taught. Feminism came into being. As all of you who do MA in English or who have done MA in English know, there were 3 waves in feminism. The first wave of feminism was in the 19th and early 20th centuries. At that time, women had only one goal, they wanted voting rights. At that time, only a few people had voting rights. Many people were not given voting rights in both UK and the USA. And they fought, they had a very, very long fight for this. And only in the 20th century, they finally got their voting rights also. I'm not going deep into that because there are so many things to talk about. The second wave is the main movement of the 1960s movement. At that time, already in the early 20th century, because of the war, the First World War and then the Second World War, there were many civil rights movements, there were many human rights movements. People were aware that we need to talk about our freedom and rights and talk about equality and all that. Women's movements also came into being as a part of this. Many women were fighting, alongside the men as nurses, Florence Nightingale, for example. In the wars of the 19th and 20th centuries, a lot of women were also involved, and there weren't many career women as such, but women were trying to come up in society as equal to men. So all these led to awakenings in the early 20th century. There were a lot of discussion on motherhood and equal pay for women, for childcare, etc. And in the 1960s, all this broke out into what is called the feminist movement. The feminist movement was primarily based on issues of equality and discrimination, of course. And the second wave was inaugurated by Betty Friedan's The Feminine Mystique, a very important book of 1963. And at this time, women began to, for the first time, talk about their experiences, their domestic issues, their lesbian tendencies. There was, for example, if I randomly give examples, there is Lillian Hellman's The Children's Hour, which was the first play to talk about lesbianism on Broadway. For the first time, there is the discussion of lesbianism on the stage. And at that time, lesbianism was a taboo topic. People were not supposed to talk about it. You'll be arrested if you talk about it. But the cast and crew of the play were not arrested because it made a change. This play brought a positive change into the society. Women's writing started. Many women's publishing companies also eventually came into being because of that. In the 1980s, feminism became an academic discipline. In the 1980s, women's studies departments came into being. Women's studies discipline developed, books developed, publishing houses developed, not only in the West, in India also. There were lots of women's publishing houses. Kali for Women is a very, very important publishing house for women. And they began to get space to talk about their issues. And at this time in the 1980s, literary theory had developed. 1960s was the time, as when post-structuralism and postmodernism became established theories in the academy. All these influenced feminism. Feminist theory developed. And at this time, feminisms developed. Different kinds of feminisms developed. Pertaining to black women, there was black feminism based on class and materialist differences that emerged, Marxist feminism, and so on and so forth. Feminism became international. Across the world, feminists mushroomed, and these feminisms were divided on bifurcated, diverged from one another on the basis of basically sexuality, because homosexuality also began to be discussed much more. Race, because black and white races began to make their voices heard a lot. Class, and even in India, caste, issues of ecology, environmental feminism. Vandana Shiva, who I will mention later also, became a very important figure at this time, etc. So different kinds of feminism emerged in the third wave. Just a quick overview of the first wave feminism. It is a very basic thing that you have to study in BA and MA courses. I'm not going into that aspect of it very much. We will discuss other issues which have more practical application in our life and literature more. In the 19th and early 20th centuries, based on activist organizations and suffrage groups, focusing on officially mandated inequalities, which means man will get one pay, women will get only half that pay. Man will get these facilities and opportunities, women will not be given so much. Like that, officially sanctioned inequalities were there. This was what the first wave feminism focused on. And there were a lot of social practices. To give an example, chattel marriages. Like our dowry system, women were traded like property. In dowry system, I keep telling everyone, think of it like you are buying your husband, It is like chattel marriage again, because the man is traded as property. You pay money and buy the man. I suppose when you start talking about it like that, dowry system will end. Men will say, no, we don't want dowry. I don't know. Chattel marriages means women are traded like property, because it is very convenient to have a wife, You don't have to pay for cook and housekeeper and cleaner, and you understand. Feminism has come to this also, that now women have to work and bring home money, plus do all the household chores, plus bring up children, plus do all the things that they were formerly doing also. Anyway, opposed to all that came first wave. The second wave, the second wave came after this, as I told you earlier. Associated with the first wave was a very powerful movement of the 19th century, the abolitionist movement. In the USA, there was a very powerful movement against slavery called abolitionism, which led to the American Civil War. Abolitionist movement had very important texts like Uncle Tom's Cabin by Harriet Beecher Stowe. Incidentally, it was a woman who wrote it. At this time, there were also slave narratives. Incidents in the life of a slave girl is a very important slave narrative in America at that time. So the slaves themselves were speaking up, and whites also were speaking for the slaves. This led to the American Civil War. And abolitionist movement can be seen as a very important phase or a very important associated movement of early feminism. Abolitionism expressed ideas. It also touched upon marriage, divorce, domestic violence, etc. Important names I have given here. You may look up and read more about them. The Grimke sisters, the Sojourner's Truth, who said, ain't I a woman? That is a very famous statement she made. And a book also. Elizabeth Cady Stanton, etc. During the first wave in America again, there was the Seneca Falls Convention. The Seneca Falls Convention was in New York, and it is considered the starting point of feminism in a way. And Seneca Falls Convention was in 1848, incidentally the year in which Communist Manifesto was written. So many changes happened in the end of the 19th century, positive changes in reaction to Industrial Revolution and all that. So Seneca Falls was the first women's rights convention. Elizabeth Cady Stanton, whom I mentioned earlier in the previous slide, and one Lucretia Mott, they were the people who were the leaders of the Seneca Falls Convention. More than 300 women came together in this convention, and they made a declaration of sentiments. Declaration of sentiments is a women's version of the Declaration of Independence, which was the starting point of USA as a nation. The Declaration of Independence is the document that formed the USA as a nation. Now they are calling their formation Declaration of Sentiments. In a way, you can say that a nation of women also virtually is founded here. So that is it. Then at this time, a very important text, not from the 19th century, but before that. Let me talk about a few texts that inspired the first wave of feminism. We cannot avoid talking about Mary Wollstonecraft. She was herself a very liberated woman, and the wife of William Godwin, a very important politician and philosopher, political philosopher of the time. He was a radical philosopher who inspired a number of our writers like Wordsworth. And Mary Wollstonecraft was a firebrand woman who lived her life the way she wanted, and she's also the mother of Mary Shelley. And Mary Wollstonecraft wrote Vindication of the Rights of Women. The previous year before this was in 1792. In 1791, she had written Vindication of the Rights of Men. Vindication of the Rights of Men also she had written in response to French Revolution. This is subtitled with strictures and political and moral subjects. She is talking about femininity as a political issue and a moral issue, but not to the extent of later feminism. She was not a feminist in every sense of the word. She did not talk about the equality of women with men as much as later feminist would, but she was actually responding to a report, a French report actually, that said that women should be given only domestic education because women are considered incapable of understanding rational subjects. Women cannot understand maths, women cannot understand physics, they cannot understand the rational subjects. They should be given only domestic education, which means learning to cook, learning to mend clothes or tailoring or household chores. That is all women can do. That was the general idea. This was in the 18th century. In the 18th and 17th century, there was a lot of misogyny. There was also the idea that women should not be loved. When a man marries a woman should be used only as a reproductive mechanism, as a machine to bring forth children. There should be no love in marriage. There should be no companionship in marriage because women are in the category of Eve. They are temptresses. Men will be led to very immoral things if they fall in love with women. Such things they believed in the 17th and 18th centuries. So at this time, what Mary Wollstonecraft has written is a revolution. She said that women are also capable of rational education. They should be given equal education as men because they can be then companions to their husbands. They can bring up their children properly. It is a kind of utilitarian perspective. Even if women do not get married and become companions to husbands, even if women do not have children, they should still get education. But that is not what she says. Later, since I mentioned utilitarian, there was another utilitarian philosopher, John Stuart Mill, who wrote, along with his wife Helen Taylor Mill, The Subjection of Women. He was a utilitarian philosopher. Utilitarianism is the idea that whatever is good for the general public, for the maximum number of people is good. In that sense, women should also be educated. In that sense, women should also be given equal opportunities because society contains both men and women. So majority should be educated, majority should be happy. In that sense, from a utilitarian perspective again, J.S. Mill says that inequality should be addressed. Social equality should be there. Women are capable of being educated and civilized, and he attacks the contemporary belief, like Mary Wollstonecraft, that women are less capable and good. These are just some early prototypes of feminist texts. They are not proper feminism. Feminism came only in the 20th century, properly. In the 20th century, as I told you at the beginning, there was a lot of civil rights movements that talked about mothers' rights and child care and reproductive health and all that. And women were granted suffrage finally in the UK and the US, bring an end to a century of protest. At the end of the first wave, this happened. But political equality and voting rights did not bring socio-cultural rights or equality. In society, in family, they continue to be subsidiary citizens. They continue to be second-rate citizens. That is why they needed second wave feminism. At this time, there was Virginia Woolf, who wrote a very important text in feminism. It is like the Bible of feminism, A Room of One's Own. A Room of One's Own is a text published in 1928, and it shows how patriarchal society prevents women from writing or expressing themselves or contributing meaningfully to the society. It prevented women from realizing their own potential. If she famously asked if Shakespeare had a sister of equal caliber named Judith Shakespeare, would she have become as famous as Shakespeare? She would have probably committed suicide, because she will not be equal to Shakespeare. She will have to rear children and do household chores. When will she have the time to sit and write? And she will be only frustrated in her career. It was not possible at that time. You know that women could not even publish. Many women until the 20th century wrote in disguised handwriting so that the manuscript will not be recognized as hers. And also they had to use pseudonyms, male pseudonyms. So in that time, Virginia Woolf also realized that nothing much has been written about women. She was sitting in the library looking at the books written on women writers. Nothing was there. There is no history of women's writing. How do women write? Who are the major writers? Nothing it is possible to know. So she realized the importance of talking about women's writing and about creating a women's canon. She therefore talks about the major women writers of that time, such as Aphra Behn, Jane Austen, the Bronte sisters, George Eliot, etc. This is an important milestone in feminism. The next important milestone is the 1949 work, Simone de Beauvoir's Second Sex. Simone de Beauvoir was the partner of Jean-Paul Sartre. She was an existentialist, feminist philosopher. And in the Second Sex, she criticized how society has perpetually identified the woman as the aberration or the other. And she famously said, one is not born but becomes a woman. For the first time probably, she was pointing to how gender is socially constructed. There is a difference emerging here between sexuality and gender. Sexuality is more of, it is not entirely, but it is also a construct, but it is more biological, but gender is more cultural, it is acquired. You learn to act like women, you learn to act like men, you learn to act your gender. So one is not born, but one becomes a woman. And that means we are always in a process of becoming. Simone de Beauvoir did not really understand or probably understand the extent to which this line means. But today we understand it a little more. We understand that our gender is constantly evolving. We are not full-time 100% women. We are a tissue of many genders. We might evolve into something other than what we are now, and in terms of our gender. That kind of fluidity of gender is not there in Simone de Beauvoir, but it is a very remarkable statement that she made. And this brings us to the discussion of what is sexuality and what is gender. When we worked for Equal, the program that I said my students and me and our friends organized a couple of years ago, we associated ourselves with the LGBTIQ A+, people, LGBTIQ A+, that is how we should say. So many, each one of these letters stands for one sexuality. And one of them got very angry with me because I was using the term gender. He wanted me to use the term sexuality only, because sexuality is a much repressed term. We don't talk about it. We don't, it is a taboo thing, and we take it for granted that sex means heterosexuality, heteronormativity. Yesterday I watched a movie that is just released. It is a Hindi movie called Made in China. It is a shocking and a very welcome discussion of sexuality, not from any homosexual perspective or anything, completely heterosexual, but it talks about how we do not accept sexuality as a normal thing and how we do not talk about it, etc. But when we really talk about it, we will be amazed. Like each one of us has a different name, has a different background, has a different psychology, etc. We also have different sexualities. We cannot be, compartmentalized into one sexuality or the other. This is the contemporary realization, and it is amazing. And this is the very foundation of the alternate sexualities and the queer theory, other alternate discussions on alternate sexualities. This realization. Next, I have talked about second wave again. I told you already it was inaugurated by Betty Friedan with the books Feminine Mystique. And in the second wave, the socio-cultural aspects of feminism got prominence. Not only political and voting rights. A lot of feminists and anti-feminists and non-feminists, etc., are already sleepy. So I have to, come to more interesting parts, I guess, very soon. A very important statement of the second wave feminists that I would like to draw your attention to is the personal is political. Women began to use their own lives. They began autobiographical writing of women acquired a lot of meaning at this time. Women began writing about their lives with a political edge. Political means where power works, how power works. In that sense, political. Women began to write about their domesticity, their sexualities, menstruation, childbirth, very personal, intimate experiences, etc. Lesbianism, etc. And this acquired a lot of... This is, again, something that the patriarchal society could not accept. We have writers like Kamala Das who have been critiqued and attacked and insulted for writing my story and her autobiography and other such works. But it is a political act for women to talk about them. You know how Dalits also write their autobiographies, their personal, intimate experiences in a very shocking and revelatory style, which is a very political act. Alternate people from alternate sexualities also do that these days. So life writing or autobiographical writing takes on new dimensions and new meaning in the context of the personal is political. At this time, a very important text is Mary Ellman's Thinking About Women. How much more time do I have? 10. And Thinking About Women talks about stereotypes of women. She talks about 11 sexual stereotypes. If anybody wants these things, instead of writing, you take a photo. It will be much quicker. It will not be possible to write down every single thing, is it? Nothing is original. Not even gender. Gender is a text that we copied from other people. We learned to be women because we saw other women perform their gender. Did it? You can take the slide with my photo also, if you with my face. Finished? He has given me only 10 minutes. I have to move on.
They'll mock me.
Kate Millett's sexual... I have to just mention the text, right? Kate Millett's Sexual Politics has a very important statement that I have given at the beginning. Sex has a frequently neglected political aspect. As an act of politics, we should talk about sexuality and gender. Patriarchy is a socially conditioned belief system masquerading as nature. Patriarchy pretends this is natural. Heterosexuality is natural. Patriarchy is natural. When you say feminism, that is abnormal. That is what patriarchy thinks. Patriarchy masquerades as natural. But sexual politics questions it. She very importantly attacks D.H. Lawrence, Henry Miller, then Norman Mailer, the important classics of the time. They were very established writers, great writers. They are questioned for relegating women as the other and for using a very phallocentric, patriarchal, for speaking from a phallocentric patriarchal point of view. Some other works that I have just mentioned, you should look them up and you should read more about them. You should read them, at least excerpts. Only then, the knowledge of feminism really becomes yours.
Then in the third wave, finally, feminism became academic. Feminism began to acquire associations with Marxism, psychoanalysis, post-structuralism. Here, they understood that feminism is plural. Women's issues is plural. Women are becoming. They began to be inspired by Derrida and Lacan, Foucault. All these writers changed the face of feminism, and they began to talk about very theoretical issues like body. There is a whole discourse on the body now, on sexuality also, and feminism in the context of consumerism, in the context of the internet and cyber culture. Such varieties of feminism and new focus of feminism also emerged. They began to talk about what is the importance of a women's language. They began to talk about how post-colonialism and race studies, etc., impact upon feminism. Got it? And emerged the first two main kinds of feminism called French feminism and Anglo-American feminism. French feminism had the major figures Julia Kristeva, Lucy Irigaray, Hélène Cixous, etc. They completely depended on Lacanian psychoanalysis. They depended on the ideas of Foucault, and they talked about the importance of developing a women's kind of writing, women's language, women's experiences. Whereas the Anglo-Americans were still very traditional. The Anglo-Americans talked about theme and characterization and general things that the patriarchal society was already talking about. They did not forge a women's perspective on things, the Anglo-Americans. And then emerged a lot of different kinds of feminisms, which I'm going to talk about next. At this point, when feminism became very theoretical, people also began to question the importance of theory. Does feminist theory impact on women's lives in any way? Is it necessary to know feminist theory? Does feminist theory liberate women at all? Such issues also came into being. And there emerged of many, these are four different kinds of feminisms: classical feminism, difference feminism, equity feminism, radical feminism. I have explained these later. Classical feminism focuses on the personhood of women, the individuality of women, and their status as morally equal to men. Classical feminism is the idea that women are separate from men, but they are equal to men. There is a strong distinction between biological differences as well as socially constructed differences. Sexuality and gender, I told you, are treated as two separate things here in classical feminism. They rejected stereotypes. This is a little early kind of feminism where Simone de Beauvoir is an important example. Difference feminism is more radical. Difference feminism asserts that women are different from men. They focus on the differences of women from men, and the two are not equal according to the difference feminists. I have given the names of important theorists here. Carol Gilligan, who was a Harvard psychologist from the US, and she wrote the important book In a Different Voice. That is the very pertinent text of difference feminism. Radical feminism is also very unacceptable to the patriarchal society. The radical feminists talk about patriarchal social structures and the need to change these structures. They are against marriage. They are against traditional kinds of women's clothing. They cut their hair. They look like men. Those are radical feminists. And they advocate a radical reordering of social and economic relations to eliminate patriarchy. They are a little extreme. And Shulamit Firestone, Monique Wittig, etc. are radical feminists. Equity feminism considers equality or equity between the two sexes more acceptable. Who's Told Feminism is an important text of equity feminism. Related to equity feminism, we have liberal feminism. Liberal feminism also stresses women's similarity and, like I said at the beginning, I consider myself more of a human being than a woman, I said. That is more like a liberal feminist attitude. We are equal with men. We don't have to talk about our differences so much. And then there is materialist feminism, Marxist feminism, neo-Marxist feminism. The focus is not on biological differences but on material differences and class differences. They understand gender oppression as analogous to class oppression. They talk about production, they talk about history, race, and such issues pertaining to women and class. There is a very important development in feminism which can be called intersectionality, which asserts that discrimination is not only based on gender, but also they talk about all the other kinds of discrimination in the same level. So it is a kind of feminism that breaks open from the boundaries of feminism into other studies. Feminism joins hands with race studies and minority studies, subaltern studies, etc. All these intersect, and it is a recent development from the 1990s. We have black feminism, and within that we have womanism. Alice Walker, who wrote The Color Purple, also wrote In Search of Our Mother's Gardens, which is an important text of womanism. It is a selection of womanist prose. That is where it developed, this concept of womanism developed. Alice Walker's womanism acknowledges women's natural contribution to society, how women have been important parts of society, and she talks about woman-woman bonding, sisterhood, etc. in these texts that I mentioned especially. Ecofeminism correlates between the patriarchal exploitation of women and the patriarchal exploitation of nature, which is also not a new idea. It has been there from the Vedas itself, but as a movement and as a very political discipline, it has developed in later times. Vandana Shiva is an important ecofeminist in India. Feminism and psychoanalysis also, in 2 sentences only I can say, feminists have a lot of differences with Freud. Freud's ideas of Oedipal complex, penis envy, etc. are completely unacceptable to feminists because he speaks from a very phallocentric perspective. He himself has, in many interviews, etc., talked about his confusion regarding women, whereas feminists consider Lacanian perspectives more influential and acceptable. Lacanian perspectives, as I already said, have formed the foundation of French feminism, and these French feminists have drawn the concept of women's writing from Lacan's concept of semiotics. When a baby is born, he is in the semiotic stage. When you acquire language, then only you get your identity. Your sense of identity is formed only in the symbolic stage, which is the linguistic stage. Before language comes, you don't distinguish between yourself and the mother or the fan or the people around you. It is all one mix of confusing perceptions. That stage of the mind can be translated into writing in stream of consciousness or modernist writing, where there is no linear plot and traditional characterization. In modernist and postmodernist writing, you have a more semiotic kind of expression, which is more like feminist expression, or which is more like literature feminine. So taking cue from post-structuralism, I told you they were influenced by post-structuralism. They developed the concept of women's language. Then there is another concept I have to talk about, which is Laura Mulvey and the male gaze. The male gaze. When in a movie you see a woman, the camera is taking the perspective of the man. It is as if the man is looking at the woman. That is how the woman is presented, to cut it short. Camera often takes the male point of view. Cinema is all about voyeurism and understanding women and their lives from a very voyeuristic male perspective. Cinema forces spectators to identify with that perspective or male gaze, and it also questions the idea that spectators have no choice but to identify with the heterosexual male gaze, because there is no other perspective usually seen in a traditional visual media in a movie. So these discussions have also been very important. These are all not single linear things. There are so many related perspectives and divergent, contrasting, oppositional ideas also involved. Another thing I should draw your attention to is how Toril Moy talks about three positions: the feminist position, the feminine position, and the female. Sorry, I mixed it up. The feminist position, the female position, and the feminine position. Feminist is when you are called a feminist, it means you have taken a political position as a feminist. It's a political position, obviously. Female is biological. Feminine is cultural. It is easy to understand. There is nothing very difficult about it. When you act feminine, it is culturally acquired. Like that, there are three aspects of your femininity or womanhood. Toril Moy has talked about it in Sexual Textual Politics. In feminism, there are three phases. The feminine phase, the feminist phase, and the female phase. This is where it is. This is the first slide. This is from Elaine Showalter. The feminine phase is when the women do not have their own independent stance. They still imitate male norms. The feminist is when they are against the men and they are radically oppositional. They are fighting separatists. It is a phase of protest. Female phase is the present phase, or the phase that came third, where women are not in opposition with men anymore. They try to go hand in hand with men. The humanist perception is more important here. The focus is on women's writing and experience rather than protesting against men. So that is what is meant by female phase. In the female phase, feminism has become more eclectic and more open to other views rather than being radical. Elaine Showalter also talks about two aspects: women as reader and woman as writer. Woman as reader is also called a feminist critique. Woman as writer is called gynocriticism. It's analogous to gynocriticism. Let me talk to you what is gynocriticism. Gynocriticism is where woman is the writer, where she is the producer of textual meaning, where she is the active agent, where the focus is on female subjectivity, rather than consuming what men have written about women. Consuming what patriarchal society or men have written about women is the first phase. Woman as reader. Woman as writer is where women are not consumers, they are producers. In the gynocritical phase, women should create an active framework for their writing. They should create a history. They should know who are their canons. They should develop a methodology of women's writing that is associated with gynocriticism. Now, I have written a little bit about gynocriticism here that you can take. Some texts I have mentioned here. Patricia Meyer-Spax has written The Female Imagination. Ellen Moas has written Literary Women. It is in Literary Women that Ellen Moas talks about female Gothic. Female Gothic as a kind of Gothic. The women as producers and readers of Gothic literature. And Sandra Gilbert and Susan Gubar also have written The Mad Woman in the Attic, which is based on Jane Eyre, as you might know. And there they talk about anxiety of authorship. When a woman starts writing, she has anxiety of authorship. Like when a woman starts driving, also she might have anxiety of drivership, I suppose. This is a man's job. I don't know how to do it. Men will try to control her when she is driving, etc., etc. Like that, a woman writer will experience anxiety of authorship because she feels that this is a man's realm. Now I want to talk to you about performativity. Look at two pictures of mine, okay? Will you look at two photos of mine? Last 1 minute. Which of these photos do you like? A or B? After all this, you are saying B still. Thank you for saying B. If you said A, it will be difficult to explain. A or B? B. B. Why do you say B?
Hair. She has hair.
She has hair. Thank you for saying that also. She has hair. Why do you think she should have hair? Second is colorful, very clever answer. I know that is not why. This looks more feminine and decent, and in Kerala we can use the word kulastri. This looks more feminine. Here in this photo I am performing my gender. In this photo I am wearing a shirt, I don't have hair. And I don't look very feminine, that's why. Performativity is related to this. How you perform your gender. Through speech, through gestures, through clothing, through appearance, through behavior. We learn to perform our gender. Performativity is a term associated with Judith Butler. She coined this term discussed this term in gender trouble. So, gender is we perform our gender, and it becomes a language in which we express ourselves. It becomes our identity. Actually, I am like the first me. Where is it? This is actually me. I like this because that is more truthful. That is me. This is a pretension. That is not me. But you like it better, so I have to perform my gender. People are texting me when I posted this in social media. Always dress like this. Wherever you go like this. Patriarchal society.
I texted you too.
You did?
Yes.
Got you. Many other things. So we have come a full circle. Once more I am saying gender is fluid. There are so many things I have not mentioned or discussed. We have to talk about sexual violence and domestic violence as two separate things in the context of feminism and gender studies. We have to talk about motherhood as an experience as well as an institution. Adrienne Rich, for example, Nancy Chodorow, for example, have talked about motherhood. Motherhood and such things about women are all glorified and glamorized, made to look as if it is wonderful. And when I got pregnant, after all the stories I heard of motherhood, I had a hell of a time. It was no fun. You can't walk, you can't eat, you can't go anywhere. What is this? I told my mother, when is this getting over? Oh my God. And she said, what are you saying? Don't you love your child? I said, I don't know, let him be born, then I love my child. Or my mother went and performed a lot of pujas. That's what she did. Now my son and me are great friends, but my motherhood has not been a wonderful thing. I'm not sure. To anybody it is wonderful. You can't sleep, you can't eat what you want. What is this? You have to dedicate your whole life to being a mother once you become pregnant. Sorry, I don't do that. To conclude, one more thing and I'll come back to motherhood. I have not talked about pornography and how women's bodies are objectified. I have not talked about the beauty myth and how women have to stay in the hourglass shape and eat less and be fair and have long hair. The most rebellious thing I did was one day I went and shaved off my head. It was such a liberation. I wish all of you do that. And anorexia is deliberately throwing up so that you will stay slim. Please don't do all that. If you are a woman because of your hormonal changes, if you are a mother especially so, you will put on weight, you will grow dark, you will grow fat, etc., etc. It is okay. One day, I told one of my girlfriends, my assistants, I said, I'm looking so fat and ugly today. I mean, these days, I have to reduce, I have to do something, go to gym or something. She said, and suddenly she held my hand and said, you're looking wonderful. You're looking like this because you're a wonderful mother. Once you deliver a child, it won't be the same again, come on. And then Adrienne Rich has said, we are all lesbians. No, she didn't say that. She coined the term lesbian continuum. That means, sexually, we may not be lesbians. That is one thing. Lesbian existence, it is called. Lesbian continuum means, because of women-identified experiences, there is something that I have experienced that you have also experienced, being women. That gender-based experiences that we all have, shareable experiences, that make us part of one lesbian continuum. In that sense, we are all part of that continuum and we are lesbians. And it also means that we should know ourselves, we should know our bodies, we should know our sexuality, we should be able to talk about it, we should be able to claim our gender and sexuality. So that is a wonderful thing. Queer theory has really empowered feminism in many ways. Before I wind up, last thing about motherhood. One wonderful thing I have done as a woman is I taught my son, I am not 24/7 your mother. When you are young and when you are growing up and when you need me, when you are dependent on me, okay, fine, I'm there, which is what even animals do. But when once he is an adult, once he can order food online or go out, take an auto and go somewhere by himself, he doesn't need me to give up my life and my career and my everything to take him around. He is having 12th standard exams. So what? I have been wondering. Because he doesn't need, he grew up like that. He grew up like that. He doesn't need me to sit with him and make him tea and keep him awake at night. I have told him, if you do not study well, it is your responsibility to study well. Your life will be affected. I don't have to lose my sleep because you have exams. I can't tell Lal sir, I can't come and teach because my son is having 12th standard exams after 3 months. There are women like that. I can't I can't go and attend a seminar or deliver a lecture because 3 months later or 1 year later my son has exams. Come on. The one thing I made him realize is your mother is a human being first. Respect me as a human being first. Respect me as a woman first. Finally, I'm also your mother, but not all the time. Always. I have to live my life. So I think in that sense I have been a wonderful mother. I am sure and I hope that my son will not do that.
The brutal lady has eaten into the time of the next speaker.